Welcome back to Wellness Wisdom. Today we're going to be talking about how to train for a half marathon, and essentially we all know that running can be very difficult, and running 13.1 miles can be even more difficult, and sticking to a training plan can be hard, especially if you don't know where to start. So today we're going to break down the different types of workouts we're going to use in our program, how to actually program, and some nutrition fundamentals. So once you understand these principles, you're going to have an easier time committing to a training plan. That discipline to actually use the workouts and stick to them and run them hard will be much easier. So we're going to start off with the different types of runs. So the first run is the long/easy run. And long runs are essentially to improve your running economy, which is the amount of energy you burn when you run. So a little definition is like, with practice, running becomes more efficient as your brain is able to control how you activate your muscles to do, the run. And essentially, with a higher running economy, you can become more efficient and use less energy at the same speed. And your aerobic base is also improved with the long run. This is also known as your VO2 max. So this is the amount of oxygen that you consume to do any kind of exercise. So this is important because if you want to run a race and you want to run it fast, essentially you need to improve your VO2 max, because that's the capacity to perform work aerobically or with oxygen. So that's just some geeky terminology that you'll need to understand these different types of runs. So your long run, the purpose is it's going to improve your running economy. That's important. It's going to improve your aerobic base. That's also important. And it's going to allow you to get used to longer durations. It's going to help you get comfortable with your long runs. And the intensity you should run these is not your race pace. The intensity of your long run should be slower than your race pace, or you can also use the speaking pace. And essentially that's running at a pace that you could actually hold a conversation with somebody without having to slow down and feel like you're out of breath. So these runs are not really meant to be overly fatiguing. So when in doubt, just kind of run them a little slower. They're also performed at 60 to 80% of your VO2 max or your heart rate reserve, which, if you have difficulties finding your heart rate reserve or understanding that, then I have an article on my website, cartergansky.com, that you can look back at any of these definitions to, help you understand. So also the duration of your long run, it's long, so they increase basically incrementally to around the distance of your race at the end of the program. So essentially it's just, this is the exercise that's going to help you feel comfortable and adapt your legs and your body to the duration of running that you need to do. So the frequency of your long run is usually 1 to 2 days per week. I put this on the weekend on Saturdays, because running for 90 minutes to 2 hours can kind of get in the way during the week. So long runs can also be changed to be like a shorter run. So these are like easy paces. So these are volumes of running that are not overly fatiguing. So 2 days a week is what I use, 1 long run, 1 short run. And this allows me to just get more volume into my training program. And how you progress these are typically, it depends on where you start. So if you're starting with your long run at 2 miles, you might want to use quarter or half mile increments so that you're not increasing 33% with a whole mile. So as a general rule, you should be increasing the intensity of any given workout by 10% each week. And this is essentially just to allow your body to recover and adapt from that stimulus. So it's also to reduce your injury risk, because if you can imagine, week over week you're increasing the speed at which you're running or the duration that you're running by 30-40%, it's not very sustainable. So if you want to get to a higher performance, you might want to just take back how soon you're starting your prep so that you can allow the time to do that properly. And the next run is the pace or the threshold run. And so this run is essentially working on your anaerobic threshold or your lactate threshold. And what this means is it's just lactate is produced when your body is working at a very high capacity, and your ability to clear that lactate aerobically can be seen by the lactate threshold. And what this is saying is that the pace run, which you're running at your race pace, should be so difficult that you're creating lactate. And so with this run, you're intentionally getting to that point, that intensity that's around 85% of your heart rate, that is at your race pace or slightly above it, so that you're producing all this lactate and you're adapting your ability to buffer it, so that when it comes to race time, you can run a fast pace without crashing and burning. So this is an intense run, which is why we differentiate the long, easy run from the race threshold run, because you can't do long duration, high intensity sustainably. So that's why we do them on different days. The duration of the pace threshold run starts at about 20 minutes. You could probably do 10 to 20 minutes if you're newer. And then you just basically increase the duration, not necessarily the intensity of these runs. So your goal is to run at the pace that you want to run your actual race at. So this is an option, or optionally you can break that duration into many different intervals if you're deconditioned or newer to running. And the frequency is about 1 to 2 days a week, probably less frequently if you're just starting out. And how you progress these is through adding time and not intensity. The other way that we can run is through interval training. And the purpose of this is interval training is fantastic at improving the performance on race day. This is because it improves VO2 max, it improves lactate threshold and exercise economy. It does pretty much everything you want it to do, and it allows athletes to kind of get that kick on race day. So that's, you're using strength, you're using power, and this is how you train it. And your intensity level should be about 85 to 115% of your VO2 max, which you can't really get much higher than that. So that's why we break them into intervals. So the duration for these runs are, the workout is probably 30 to 60 minutes, but you're going to break that into 30 seconds to 5-minute intervals. And that work to rest ratio is typically about 1 to 1. So this means that if you're doing 800 meter repeats on a track, so that's going to probably take you 3 to 5 minutes to do that, and that work is going to be 3 to 5 minutes, and then you're going to rest for 3 to 5 minutes. You can do this just walking and looking at your watch. So this is going to allow you to fully recover so you can sprint again very vigorously. So you're trying to raise your heart rate, you're trying to improve your VO2, and that's going to be at a very high intensity. The frequency of this interval training is going to be about 1 to 2 days per week. If you are newer, I would suggest a lower frequency because these runs tend to accumulate a lot of fatigue, and new runners might increase your risk of things like stress fractures or, compartment syndrome, which, you want to start slowly, especially with these more intense workouts. So what are some examples of interval training? So there's a lot of different ways you can take your interval training, which is good because there's so many options that you can just kind of play around with what works for you and your training so that you're not getting bored just doing the same workout week after week. So track repeats are probably the easiest because you just go to a track, you do 400 to 1200 meter repeats for about 4 to 8 repetitions. And your intensity level is pretty high, 85 to 90% of your VO2 max. And for this stuff, you can really focus on your arm swings and your leg drive. And one thing that's commonly misunderstood about running is that you should focus on increasing your step length. This is actually a misconception. You should actually improve your step rate. So that's how many cycles in a second that you can, bounce from leg to leg. So aim for the shortest possible time that your foot hits the ground and then bounce off with power. So those are kind of things that you should think about when it comes to form. I'm not going to get too much into that, but try to keep that in mind when you're doing these interval workouts, because that's going to help your exercise economy when it comes to race day. So hill sprints are also a fun way to do interval training. So the duration of your hill sprint is it's the same as 30 seconds to 3 minutes work, and you can just find a hill, 4 to 12 sets of sprinting up the hill as fast as you can with big powerful steps, and then pumping your arms for that exercise economy. The next workout it's a fartlek, which I think the word is Swedish, stands for speed play. So the duration of this is going to be 20 to 60 minutes total. And it's going to be basically intervals of jogging and sprinting. So you're going to be doing your easy run pace, about 70% of your VO2 max, with hill or wind sprints, intervals, a fast burst for 30 to 60 seconds. And this is basically to introduce you're kind of picking from your easy run and your high intensity run all in the same day. So it's fun, it's different, and it's adapting a lot of systems at the same time. So one thing that I like to do is to lock onto a target, like a tree. So say I'm running on a trail and I see a light, like a tree or a light pole. I'm going to sprint to it for 30 seconds, and then I'm going to slow back down to a recovery pace for 3 to 5 minutes, and then repeat that for 2 to 6 miles. And that's going to be a pretty tough workout. High intensity interval training, you've probably heard before. So this is an intensity greater than your VO2 max, very short durations. And essentially you can do whatever you like for these. The whole goal is just to get your heart rate through the roof. Burpees, hill sprints, jump squats, jump rope, all of those things would be considered high intensity interval training. You can also do this on a bike. That's a pretty common way that people do a high intensity interval training, is 3 minutes on for as hard as you can go, 3 minutes off, and then repeat that 3 times. Cross training is basically how you can improve more movement variety into your training. So this is going to help reduce boredom, right? But if you think about running, what are you using? You're using your hips, you're using your ankles and your knees in the same repetitive motion, and you're pounding on that concrete every single step. So cross training includes things like swimming or cycling or rowing. These are movements that kind of distribute the stress of fatigue that you're subjecting your body to by, trying to run a half or a full marathon. And personally, I like doing 60-minute rides on the bike. My personal goal is to do three times a week, ride my bike for 60 minutes, just get that basically easy run pace, so speaking pace, and just get insanely fit doing biking. And resistance training, I would say, would also fall under cross training. And for runners, this is probably an underutilized tool because it can improve your running efficiency and performance, because if you're stronger, you can produce more work. So that's obvious. But I think more importantly, strength training can also reduce your risk of injury. And this makes sense if you think about it. So if you're going to train, say, your calves or your quads or your hamstrings or your glutes or your leg, just all of your leg muscles, your muscles are basically shock absorbers for your joints, like your knee and your hip. So if you don't have any muscle and you're going to go run 3-4 hours, all of that stress is going to go into your joints, and it's not going to be absorbed by, it will be absorbed by your ligaments and tendons, but you really want to have solid muscles to help you absorb that shock. And that's what we do with resistance training. So there's different forms of resistance training. I think for some like skinny runners might like calisthenics, which is totally fine. Like if you could get a great workout doing squats or push-ups or just different like burpees, and you don't even need equipment to do it, which is nice. But my personal lean is hypertrophy, so I enjoy building muscle. But they're all important forms. And I think also for the aerobic athlete, power, which is speed, is also very important to train. And calisthenics, like I said, is great, but you can focus on like lunges, squats, calf raises, or even your anterior tib raise. So these are muscles on the front of your leg that if you're ignoring them, you're kind of putting yourself at risk for, like I said, overuse injuries. So don't forget to cross train. It's not all about running, it's about longevity. So let's get to the actual meat and potatoes of what a program looks like. So this is a general program because a specific program needs to be tailored to your individual training history or training factors like, are you male or female? How much do you weigh? Have you run before? So these all kind of change the timeline, the intensity, and the goal. So a beginner may take longer, but with some experience, like 3 to 6 months should be a reasonable timeline for you to be able to train safely and run a pretty good race. So adaptations aerobically can take a very long time. So as I was saying, aerobic capacity, or that VO2 max, can take 2 to 5 months to improve. And this mechanism is through basically, there's a bunch of mechanisms like enzymes and mitochondria. It's a very slow adaptation period for aerobic training, but that's why we plan ahead. So I would say 3 to 6 months, right? And a running frequency between 3 to 5 days a week is a good Goldilocks sweet spot, because more than 5 days a week, you're looking at overtraining, because we should be doing things like cross training and resistance training, and also having a rest day, because rest is important to recover. And then less than 3 days a week, you're not really getting optimal stimulus to adapt to the higher intensities. So that's kind of the top contour of programming. I would say another thing to consider is a lot of people like to run fast, and that's great. You should be wanting to run fast. But my advice is to run fast on your fast days and to run slow on your slow days. So don't make your long runs and your easy runs into threshold paces, because you're gonna get overtrained, and then when it comes to run an actual pace or a threshold run, you're not gonna be able to sustain the intensity that you should. So we're gonna break the programming into different phases. So the first preparatory phase is 4 weeks to 36 weeks. And I put a lot of weeks on here because it just depends on where you are in your athletic career. So if you are deconditioned, you might want to start with like a walk-jog program. So that would be like running 15 to 25 minutes on your long runs, right? And then walking 15 to 90 minutes with your long runs or your long walks, and then doing a resistance training program so you can build the capacity to actually have, decent aerobic fitness, because it might take a long time if you've never run before. So your Monday through Sunday split looks like a pace run on Monday. You're going to cross train Tuesday. Wednesday is going to be an easy run. Thursday is going to be interval training, which could be track workouts, hill sprints, fartleks. All of those things would be on Thursday. Well, not all of them. You pick one and then perform it. Friday is going to be cross training plus a little 1 to 3 mile run. Saturday is going to be the long run. So these are anywhere from 1 to 20 miles, right? Just depends where you are in the program. And then Sunday is always a rest day. It's always active rest. And just to talk on the active rest a little bit, this could mean just walking, with your friends or doing yoga. Rest doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be sedentary. It just means that you're not intentionally performing exercise to break down your muscle or to adapt your aerobic capacity. So that preparatory phase is going to be progressed. So like your pace run, for example, it's going to progress in 4-week blocks. Or it's going to 4-week blocks make up a month. So the first 3 weeks of the month are going to be increased 10%, right? We said 10% in intensity, duration every week. And then your 4th week is going to be your transitory or your recovery week before you go to the next block. So this could look like your Saturday long run. So you start at 6 miles. Week 1, 6 miles. Week 2, 7 miles. Week 3, 8 miles. Week 4 is our rest week before we go into the next block. So we take it down 3 miles. So it's only 5 miles. So this is going to allow us to progress intentionally so that when we come to the race, we're running our long runs at 12 to 13 miles, and then we can do some replica or practice races if that's your half marathon goal. And so that's pretty much how the preparatory phase works. You could add more or less time, but then we come to the specific preparatory phase. And so what this means is in the name. It's specific. It's specific to your goals. So if your goal is to run fast, we are going to add more fast training. So your interval runs are going to be run, faster, and you're going to have more duration, and you're going to have more reps of those interval runs. And then we're going to kind of move away a little bit from the easy stuff, because if you want to run easy, then your pace is going to be slower on race day. So we're going to take a little bit of that volume away from the easy and give it a little bit to the harder stuff. So what this means is your interval training is going to be about 20% of your volume in general. There's a few different program methodologies. So you have your polarized, which is at low intensity at one end and then high intensity at one end, and there's nothing in the middle. Then you have your pyramidal, where you're sloping linearly from low intensity to high intensity. But around 20 to 80% should be your goal. So 80% being your long runs and your easy runs, and then 20% being your interval training, which is your just high intensity. And you can think about it in heart rate. So you want 80% of the time your heart rate to be in a range that's around zone 1, zone 2, and then 20% of the time you're sprinting up a hill, you're at 180 beats per minute. And that's a specific preparatory phase. And this is cool because we can implement what's called a taper. And it means basically 7 to 28 days before the race, you're going to cut your volume. And there's a couple ways to do this. My favorite way is just to cut it by 40 to 60% 2 weeks before the race. So with the taper, you're basically just trying to get your legs to feel as fresh as possible. And then alongside with the taper, we're going to have some carb loading, which basically you're going to use less glucose and you're going to eat more glucose so that you're going to store more. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's basically the whole program is general and then specific. And then on race day, we're going to sleep 7 to 9 hours the day before. We're going to have a pregame meal, and then we're going to get there early and dynamically warm up. And then, you earned it, right? So this is game day. You're going to show all your hard work. It's going to be fantastic. So yeah, that's kind of how you program for a half marathon. But there's a little bit more to it because nutrition and hydration can complicate things if we don't pay attention. So we're going to start with carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are a macronutrient, and you probably already know that. But a higher carbohydrate diet has actually been shown to improve your performance compared to a higher protein or fat diet. This is because your muscle has little sugars in it called glycogen. And this is allowing you to use energy quickly when you're running. So storing carbs in your muscle, if those stores are lower, it's been linked to fatigue. So when you run out of carbs, you might be fatigued. There are some athletes who can become fat adapted, and I think marathon runners could probably do this, but for sure, what's called ultra marathon running, which is just anything greater than a full marathon. These can go for like hundreds of miles. These people can adapt away from carbohydrates towards fat burning and get really efficient at it. However, we are running a half or a full marathon. So carbohydrates are essentially like a performance enhancing modality. So it's been shown in the literature that the more carbs you eat, you run a little better on race day. So the general recommendations for athletes just training is 5 to 10 kilograms or 5 to 10 grams per kilogram. The exact number depends on all of your factors, like your sex, your age, and your activity level and your goal. And also your gut, right? Everyone has a different gut. Everyone has a different tolerance to carbs. So find what works for you. But generally, 5 to 10 grams per kilogram. And if you're running in 1 hour or less, it's like 5 to 7 grams per kilogram. 1 to 3 hours, 6 to 10 grams per kilogram. 4 hours or more, 10 to 12 grams per kilogram. So carbohydrates can also be consumed during the race and should be consumed during the race. This is because after 45 minutes, you start to see that glycogen start to dip. And so you can actually replace that with sports drinks. So Gatorade. Gatorade is, it's a sports drink, right? It has 5 to 10% glucose, or more than just glucose, different types of sugars. And you're supposed to have like 30 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour in events lasting over 60 minutes. So that's pretty much carbs. But you should also think about the source of carbs. So you're trying to kind of not eat junk food. This isn't like a binge. So you shouldn't be eating candy or ice cream. You should focus on like whole foods that are good for you, like oatmeal and sweet potato. And not processed foods, which I'm sure you already knew that. But carbohydrate loading is where it gets crazy. So this coincides a little bit with the taper. So if we're reducing training volume, we're using less carbohydrates. We're also going to increase the carbohydrate intake. So we're going to consume around 8 to 10 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate 72 hours before, and 10 to 12 grams per kilogram about 2 days before. And this is going to, the idea, right, is that by eating more carbohydrates, we're going to store more glycogen than we ever had before, so that during race day, we are going to be able to mobilize all of this glycogen and run faster, because what is carbs? Carbs is energy. And to be fair, you shouldn't do this for the first time at race, like at your competition. You should do this, pick a long run and just try it out in training. See what kind of foods work for you. See what kind of, gram per kilogram is best for your body and your performance, and play around with it. But don't experiment on race day. So protein is important, but the range here is 10 to 35% of your total energy intake. And endurance athletes should generally consume 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram of their body weight. And if you are trying to lose weight actively, which I would not recommend in a prep, you might actually require much more protein, because you're trying to prevent that muscle loss that comes with weight loss. And then fat is not as important because we're trying to focus on carbohydrate, but 20 to 25% fat should be eaten. And this is basically just for hormones, and your cell walls are made out of cholesterol and that kind of thing. Kind of important. We don't want to mess with fat too much. And kind of interesting is caffeine. So caffeine used to be banned as a performance enhancing drug until recently for running. So consumption of around 5 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine has been shown to increase the length of time that you can basically just exercise before you become exhausted. So you can have that cup of coffee, might help you. And along with that cup of coffee, we have like pre-competition meals. So what do you actually eat before the race? So this kind of depends when your start time is. My start time is around 7 a.m. So I don't really want to wake up at 3 to eat, a big burrito. So if I'm waking up at 4 or 5, that's 2 hours before I can actually have some toast, some eggs, maybe some fruit and coffee. But I'm not going to have like a big, massive meal because you don't want to digest that while you're running. So if you wake up 1 or fewer hours, you're going to fuel with like a banana and honey. So it's super simple. It's going to empty from your gut quickly. You're going to get that sugar in your system. And after the race, right, after running for hours on end, your glycogen stores are going to be completely depleted. So we should be repleting that with carbohydrate meals every 15 to 60 minutes. And that's just for, longevity. Go enjoy yourself. Hydration. So we should drink 5 to 12 ounces of water every 15 to 20 minutes. But this is only if the activity is less than an hour. Because if it's over an hour, like we said, we should probably be drinking more than just water. We should be drinking sugar, electrolytes, and water every 15 to 20 minutes. And that carbohydrate solution can change. You can make it yourself. But the bandwidth should be 5 to 10% of sugar to fluid. And you should also consider things like sodium and potassium because that's important for your muscles. But if you're eating a balanced diet, it should not be a problem. And drinking fluid is important, right? Because depending on the temperature that you're running in, losing more than 2% of your mass would suggest that you're dehydrated. And dehydration can lead to things like heat stroke, which could lead to death. So, that's actually kind of serious. You want to really consider about replacing your fluids, especially if you're running in a very hot environment. Recovery wise, so after the run, the worst thing you can do is lay on the road and not move because your heart is used to beating at 150, 140 beats per minute. And then you're basically going to say, we're going to stop running. We're just going to stop all, because if you're not walking, you're not saying, hey, muscles, we're going to move and you're going to get some more blood. You're just going to cut it off like that. And if you're younger, it might be fine, but you might want to think about slowly moving after you finish the race, but just walking or stretching to gradually lower your heart rate. So it's not from 140 to 60 in 10 seconds. So you also want to think about static stretching to reduce muscle soreness. So really the big ones would be calves, hamstrings, quads, hip flexors, or whatever feels tight, right? So just listen to your body. And then refuel. And then check your feet for blisters because depending on your shoes, you might have kind of messed them up. But that's what we practice on during the program. And then some considerations, right? So many runners believe that if it's good to run like at a higher intensity and with more duration, more is better, right? If some is good, more is better. However, this is true for some. Like there are some endurance athletes who regularly train over 140 miles a week. These people generally make careers out of running, and they've had years to build their aerobic base. They've had a long time to build up their bone mineral density in the gym, and it just takes a long time to progress to that level. An improper progression can lead to overtraining and injury, and you can be discouraged and say, hey, maybe this running thing isn't for me. But that's why I'm saying you should probably take the time to be patient and to progress intentionally so that you're not putting yourself in a bad position. Interval training, right, like we said, can be swapped for anything you would like to do. Hill sprints, the fartlek, you could do just interval training on a track with repeats. So just kind of experiment and see what you like the most. The whole goal is just to raise your heart rate, really use your legs, and move that lactate threshold to a higher intensity. Keep your long runs easy and at a speaking pace. If you can't get out more than a few words, you should probably slow down, right? You should be trying to speak in paragraphs with ease. So don't feel discouraged also if you don't make that goal pace. And if you're not progressing to that goal pace, you should just expand your time horizon, because you have many years to run. You have a long time, so it's not it is a race, but you shouldn't be compromising your body to get to your, the goals that you want. Just expand your time horizon. Say like, okay, well, if I can't run it in 6 months, maybe next year, right? And then start that general preparatory phase a couple months earlier, and start with walking if that's what you need. And also just a disclaimer, right? There's no one size fits all program. Everyone's kind of different. And like, this information is totally educational. It's not meant to be prescriptive in any way. But if you found it useful, if you found it educational, you can find more on my YouTube channel, cartergansky.com. You can subscribe or check my website, cartergansky.com, where I'll have all of these program metrics for you to use. Okay, thank you. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.